Hi guys, my name is Jamie Large, and for those of you who don't know me, I used to be a pretty active team leader, but right now I mainly work with some of our students in the home and I do some resource work. This is one of our required modules for the annual staff training for Accessibility Medcare, and I'll be talking to you guys today about some strategies and tips that you can use when working with your students. So on this first slide are a couple hands-on approaches that I personally use multiple times a session usually. Up first is first then statements. And these are really helpful for if your student isn't really sure what's going to be happening next, or if they're having anxiety that they're not going to get their preferred activity. Let's say, for example, I'm working with Christian at table time, and he is just asking me nonstop about going for a walk or going to the park or something. And I can tell him, hey, how about first we finish these two worksheets and then we can go on a walk? Explaining to your student what's expected of them first in order to get what they're asking about. Next is visual schedules, which is an easy tool you can refer to throughout your session. And this is a really great way for your student to have a hands-on approach. When making their schedule for the day, they get to be involved. And if our students have a difficulty comprehending, what comes next in the day, they have a hard time with transitions, or they're asking about something else that's not on the schedule, it's a really good way to redirect them into staying on track. It can be done on a piece of paper, on a bulletin board, expo, anything that you have available. Try and have your students, practice writing out the date on there, get a little hands-on fine motor practice. Next are sensory strategies. And, if a student is upset or needs a break, you can use these strategies, which include, going for a walk, playing with some putty, coloring, having a dance break, moving their body in some sort of way and stimulating their senses, any of them. It's a great way to calm down students, sometimes even help students focus better. There are some students who do table time much better if they have something in their hand to squeeze or fiddle with while they're working. Up last is to prepare our students for any potential changes. Our kids really depend on routine and patterns, and when something happens to disrupt their usual pattern, it can cause a lot of chaos, a lot of anxiety or uncertainty, and this can lead to it manifesting in unwanted behaviors. So, asking your kids, oh, does this make sense in general isn't really a good way to gauge if your kid understands what's going on. You really want to break it down for them in terms of who, what, when something might be changing and why something is changing. And especially if your students, verbally capable, it's always great to see if they can, answer those questions back to really exhibit, they have a solid understanding of what to expect. It's also a great way to use social stories, and we have a whole email dedicated just to that. You can reach out to socialstories.aamc@gmail.com. You can ask me, you can ask any of our team leaders for social stories, and they'll definitely help you out or get you in contact with someone who can. So if you have a change that's coming up in your student's life, it's always recommended to reach out to us and let us know so we can help you with a social story to make that transition as smooth as possible. Up next, we're going to be talking about reinforcement strategies, one of my favorite sections. Up first is a token board system or a token reinforcement system. And this can be used as a way to motivate our kids to stay on task. Usually you want to pick, some sort of incentive that the kid really wants. Usually always have the kid pick what they're working for, whether it be something as simple as computer time at the end of JIT, or maybe a snack at home, or playing a game or something like that. Any sort of preferred activity that they really want to work for is going to be written on a piece of paper, expo board, anything, and you want to do little check marks to see if they earn it. Usually I typically do about 5 check marks before one of my students can earn something on their token board. And what's important is that these tokens don't really have to be tokens. You can just check boxes on a piece of paper. But you want to make sure that these check marks are easily accessible and given for things that we may view as very simple, you know. If my student is sitting with a nice calm body and quiet voice, I'm going to praise them. I'm going to shower them in praise and give them a big check mark on their token board. I'm going to show them their token board. I'm going to tell them exactly what they did that was good, why they earned their check mark, and that they are one check closer to earning their reward. And this sort of feeds into the second thing on this slide, which is positive reinforcement. And our kids respond so well to this. They really look up to all the technicians. They love you guys. And high fives, fist bumps, positive words, they go a really long way. Try and mix it up. You know, good job doesn't have to be the only thing that they hear 50 times a day. You can tell them that they did an excellent job or they're a superstar, you know, get them pumped about it, get them excited in their progress. They should be proud of themselves, you know? So positive reinforcement should be done more than anything, you know, all day, every day, even when you think that they may just be sitting and it doesn't seem like anything spectacular, it's still worth giving them positive reinforcement for because they are being socially acceptable. You know, you want to reward that. Up next, we're going to talk about strategies for managing behaviors. You know, this is kind of one of the more difficult aspects of our jobs. And so here are some tips to kind of manage any challenging situations you may come across. Typically, and I know this is going to sound weird, but ignore them. Ignoring behaviors is one of the best things that we can do for these kids. Because whether you realize it or not, attention is a form of reinforcement. You know, giving a kid a bunch of attention when they're having a tantrum makes them think, oh, if I start yelling, Miss Jamie's going to come over and pay attention to me. So they may be more likely to have that tantrum if it means you're going to go over and talk to them. If ignoring it doesn't work and, you know, a student is still persisting in a negative behavior, you can try to redirect them, you know. This is particularly helpful if you have a student who engages in SIB, a self-injurious behavior, you know, say they're biting or hitting. Typically, it's going to be involving their hands. So usually I recommend a sensory strategy to redirect that, you know, get their hands busy with like Play-Doh or putty or something, or drawing or making a puzzle, something that's kind of more of a preferred activity but occupies whatever part of their body might be causing this negative behavior. So that way, you know, they can calm down a little bit, decompress, and hopefully express themselves in a more appropriate way. And this leads into distraction techniques. I like to rely on distraction techniques personally when it's a little more of a tense situation. If I have a student who may be vocalizing very loudly and I can't really seem to get through, and don't yell because it can only escalate the student a little bit more. So a distraction technique, for example, could just be like rapid firing off some questions at them, and something that's really simple, really straightforward, that they don't really have to think about, just to kind of snap them out of whatever funk they're stuck in. It can be, you know, what color is the sky? What color is the grass? What comes after spring? What comes after summer? Like going through that kind of stuff until they start to calm down and look at you and answer questions a little more evenly. Then you can kind of readdress whatever may have triggered that behavior to begin with. You want to look and see what happened immediately beforehand, see if you can get your student to calm down enough to address it in an appropriate way without any behaviors that may be causing harm to your student or anyone around them. So, and also, you know, reminding their rules is also a really great time to put that in there if you're trying to distract them. Instead of just asking, you know, what color are things, you can also throw in what kind of body do we have, you know, a calm body, what kind of voice, a quiet voice, what kind of hands, safe hands, stuff like that. Like rules that your kids kind of already have ingrained in their head, that's like second nature to them. Put those rules in there too, because it can also, you know, make them remind themselves, oh, like I'm not behaving on my best behavior. Like I do need a calm body. I do need a quiet voice. And it helps kind of bring them back to base zero. And this leads into our very last bullet on the page, which is reminders, which should be done all day, not just when your kid's having a hard time. You want to remind them of their rules, what's expected of them. I like to begin every session I have with my students The first thing I do is I say hello, and then I tell them, okay, what are our rules? And we run down their rules and what I expect of them for that day. It's a really good reminder to do that at the beginning of the session, throughout, and including that in your positive encouragement, when you're working with your kids. Next, we're going to break down the Blossom method, and we're going to go into more detail in the next few slides, so don't worry. Up first is B, to break down tasks. And this could be done in a very, very, as broken down way as possible. Because, a simple task for us could be, go pick up that glass of water on the other side of the room. Where we would just go pick up the glass of water, one of our students may see like 10 different steps in there. Like, okay, I have to stand up, I have to walk over there, I have to pick up the glass. Like it's a lot more than what we, initially might think. So breaking it down, especially for new skills, is going to be really helpful for our students to have them work towards independence as much as possible, which is the end goal for all of our kids. L is the level of prompting, and we're going to break down the level of prompting a little bit more in a few slides. I want you to think about how much prompting and what level of prompting your student needs, based on either it's a new skill, a skill they already have some experience with, or, if there's anything that may not be entirely safe, you want to take precautions, or maybe you want to boost up their self-esteem. There's a whole host of things that go into the level of prompting, which we'll break in more after this slide. Up next in Blossom is O, over and over again. Repetition is key for our kids. They really thrive when they have the chance to practice things multiple times. SS is to set up for success. You want to be a step or two ahead of your student, have materials prepared so transitions go smoothly. O stands to observe, take data, take note of how your kid's reacting to things, make sure your shared village notes or an accurate reflection of that. And up last is my favorite, M, motivate. You really want to encourage your student, praise them, high five them, make sure you're being specific in your praise is a really big thing. Tell them exactly what they did that was right, and make it fun. So going back to L, prompting, the level of prompting, this is a breakdown of all the prompts that we're really going to be using. Starting at the top of the pyramid is our least category, our lightest type of prompting. At the very top is independent, which is our goal, which means, hands off. You're not saying anything, you're not doing anything. Your student is able to complete a task from start to finish by themselves. And as we go down our pyramid, our level of intensity, or our intensity of the prompting, is going to become a little more stronger. So working up to gestural is if you just point at something. Visual could have picture cue cards. We have them in the bathrooms at JIT, if you've noticed that. V, verbal, it's usually just giving straightforward directions. You see this very often, especially in the therapy center. Up next is modeling, and personally I think this is one of the most important types of prompting because our students really look up to the technicians and they really learn from you guys. They watched you guys even when you don't think they are. They're watching and learning from you. So if you model something for them and with them to help them learn, they're really gonna take heed of that. So modeling goes a really long way, especially when a student is learning a new skill. And working our way up to the most intense forms of prompting are partial physical and full physical. A partial physical could be if you're trying to guide your student's arm towards something, you can nudge them at the elbow and push them forward. You can gently touch their wrist and guide them. And working all the way up to a full physical prompt is where you're really doing hand over hand prompting, you're guiding them. And that's really for new skills. Like we said, most to least is when it's a new skill, you want the adult or technician maintaining the maximum control over the teaching environment to establish a strong foundation and boost confidence, make sure that student realizes like, oh, this is doable. And up next is least to most prompting. So this is starting at the top of our pyramid. We had independent up top. So we're working our way down to a more intense type of prompting depending on how our students react. So when our student already has a higher level of skill, you want to let them try on their own first, independent. Let them try and figure it out. And if they're unsuccessful, then maybe you can point to a little hint, a little cue, a little gestural prompt, work your way up to a verbal prompt, give them directions. And if they still don't respond, that's only when you would move up the prompt hierarchy even more to a partial or full physical prompt. And students may experience more errors this way, and you may need to increase the level of prompting, like we said, when these errors occur. The most important thing to keep in mind through all of this is, remember, you're going to have to fade out these prompts. Like we said, our goal is independence. So we don't want our kids to get too comfortable with the prompting, rely on us too much. So you want to make sure over time you're pulling away those supports so that way they can get a little more familiar with becoming more and more independent. Say your student is really used to a hand over hand prompt. Eventually you want to fade to a wrist prompt, and then fade to an elbow prompt, and then maybe just fade to modeling if they're washing their hands, fade to just showing them what they're supposed to be doing, fading to just a verbal direction, working your way up the hierarchy that way until they're fully independent. Up next is the rope method. So R is to review, read the background information of the child. If you're working with a new kid or any kid, we do annual treatment plans for a reason. Things change, kids grow. You can find all these treatment plans on Shared Village under Documents. If you go under your particular student, all the treatment plans are there. O, observe, collect additional information to provide a baseline and level of performance. This is kept track in, the treatment plan and annual updates that we ask you guys to do for the students sometimes. P is to probe, expand your knowledge of the child by exploring further possibilities. Our kids can surprise you all the time. Try new things. They're going to learn it and pick it up a lot faster than you imagine, and sometimes they have these hidden talents that you would never imagine until you find them. So up next is E, to evaluate. You want to monitor, make judgments, adjust goals. Again, this is done in the treatment plan, and it really relies on what you guys, the technicians, are putting in your Shared Village notes, what you're keeping track of. The stuff that you guys see on a day-to-day basis is essential when it comes to evaluating and making changes for these kids so they can continue to grow. So this next one's a little tricky. What to do if your student is having a tantrum. So first, you want to take a deep breath and analyze why the tantrum is occurring and avoid reinforcing it. So usually you want to look for an antecedent, which happens immediately before the behavior. If your student starts yelling or having a tantrum, try and think about, okay, well, what happened right before that? And you want to avoid reinforcing it. And a lot of this kind of goes back to what we talked about in terms of attention being a reinforcer, which means you want to have a neutral tone and effect. You don't want to escalate the situation anymore. You want to address it very calmly and matter-of-factly. You want to tune out the bystanders. And this is really important, and this can be really difficult, especially if you're out in the community or even if you're at JIT. You and your student are the only one who matter in that situation. Don't worry about other people looking at you, someone else trying to help. What matters is you and your student. And if you do need the help, don't be afraid to ask. That's why we have team leaders. That's why Erica's around. That's why you have a whole team of people to back you up. So don't be afraid to ask for help when you need it. And it's important to remember the big picture and understand that this is really a learning moment for your child and also for all of us. You want to make objective decisions rather than emotional ones. I know it's hard. Try not to get swept away in the moment. Rely on those strategies that we talked about earlier in this module. When you have to deal with some negative behaviors, try and redirect, distract, all that good stuff. And most importantly, stop beating yourself up. The most perfect technician, the most perfect child, tantrums are still going to happen. It's a learning moment, and that's all that matters. So that concludes my section on strategies and tips when working with our kids. If you guys have any questions for me in particular, or you need any resources or help, definitely feel free to shoot me an email. I'll always get back to you guys. My email's on the screen. It's jlarge.aamc@gmail.com. If you have any feedback for these modules, definitely shoot them over to Dr. Rowe at accessiblemedcare2@gmail.com. Thank you guys for listening, and happy teaching with your kids.